This is the AllTrade TradePro 19-gallon vertical tank compressor. A great little compressor. It served me well until one day when this copper line broke. And what happened was it broke as a result of this pressure switch failing. And that overloaded the compressor and caused this flange to split. Now that isn't the biggest problem. The problem is that flange happens to be a metric fitting. So first I checked around to see if I could get some metric compression fittings to put over the copper, and they just don't exist. And then the next logical thing was to contact the company that makes the compressor and get a replacement part. But it wasn't that easy to get a new tube for that. That tube wraps around underneath and connects over here to the fitting that goes into the tank, which is also metric. Now this is more than just a brass fitting. This is actually something called a check valve. Now the check valve keeps the air inside the tank. It keeps it from reversing back out. And there's another little tube that sticks out the side, and that goes to something called the unloader. And the reason for having an unloader is because when the cylinder head is pressurized and you stop the compressor, if you try to start it again, it'll be difficult for the motor to start if there's air in the line. So whenever you stop the compressor, turn off the power, the unloader bleeds off the excess air that's in this tube. So I mentioned I couldn't get a part from the manufacturer. Basically they told me they just didn't have it, and that was it. It had this really funny flange on the end of it that was formed onto the pipe, and there was no way to duplicate it at any of the local compressor shops. But continuing on with our description of this compressor, the nice thing about it was all of the major ports into or out of this compressor were standard NPT national pipe threads. So it was easy to take off these fittings and go to regular pipe fittings and then go to regular compression fittings from there. Now as we look at the tank here, these two ports on the bottom are what go to the tank. This one is the line going in, where the air goes into the tank, and this one over here is where the air goes out of the tank. Okay, it comes out of the tank and it goes into this pressure switch. Now this particular pressure switch has a four-way output, I believe, or a three-way output. So you've got the air coming from the tank up into the flange. Here you have a relief valve that you can pull to empty the air out of the tank. Above that you have the gauge that indicates the current pressure in the tank. Here we have the pressure switch itself and the lever that turns the switch on and off. Opposite side of this switch is where you'll find the unloader. So here's where the air comes out. This goes into the regulator where we can adjust the outgoing pressure to our power tools. And here's the gauge that shows that pressure going out. And then we have the pipe that goes out and connects to our fittings, that goes to our air lines and our power tools. So I basically took off all these pieces one by one until I got it down to the pipe sticking up out of the tank. And then I took off the check valve, this brass fitting here, and then I took off the brass piece from the top side of the cylinder. The threads coming out of the cylinder head and the threads coming out of the tank were both half-inch NPT. So some of the things I needed to get was a check valve, and there's a couple different types of check valves. One is an in-tank check valve. This would actually screw into those half-inch threads into the tank. It actually sticks into the tank. There is another kind of check valve, and it's called an inline check valve. Basically, you put it in between the two pieces of pipe that are sticking out. But because of the way my tank was, I just put a small piece of pipe sticking up And then I put the check valve onto that. Then I put a fitting that went from 1/2 inch NPT to 1/2 inch compression fitting. And that would receive the tube that came from the cylinder head. At the cylinder head, we had another fitting that was 1/2 inch NPT coming out of the cylinder head, and that went to 1/2 inch compression fitting. And then I just had to bend the copper tube to fit. Here you can see the check valve and the pressure switch from the opposite side, and you can see how the tube goes from the check valve to the unloader. And because of the direction of these ports off of this manifold, I did have to put some things on different sides, and I also had to add a pipe elbow here to connect to the pressure switch. But, you know, as long as the things connect up pretty much the same, that's all that matters. So you can see the gauge is off the regulator. My gauge ended up having a leak, so I had to have that replaced. But it's pretty much done. I fired it up. Everything was good and tight. Everything sealed up nice. I'm pretty happy with the way it worked. So with the places I talked to, they had like an $80 shop rate to get anything done. They probably would have spent about at least 3 hours working on this thing. Then you add parts, pressure switch. Everybody was asking $35 for a pressure switch. I got mine from compressor-source.com. They also have some great YouTube videos that you should take a look at. And then the check valve, I spent another, I think it was another $20 for a check valve. You know, most places probably would have charged $35 for that. All the other fittings and miscellaneous stuff, I probably would have been into this thing for, you know, easily $300 to have it repaired by someone else. I haven't added up all my receipts yet, but I think I'm probably in the neighborhood of maybe 150. So I'm happy with that.